We have all dealt with difficult coworkers. There's the chronic complainer, the office bully, the passive aggressive type, and at times they can make work feel completely miserable. But here's an inconvenient truth. Difficult people are a workplace reality we can't fully control or avoid. And while we don't always get to decide who we work with, we do have agency over our own selves, and we have power over how we respond to and engage with difficult colleagues. I'm Dr. Emily Anhalt, clinical psychologist and co-founder of COA, the Gym for Mental Health. In this course, we are going to explore self-reflection questions and techniques to help you better manage difficult behavior and relationships so you can make life at work better. It's really tempting to let someone's negative behavior color your entire view of them as a person. And we definitely do this with coworkers. You might write them off completely rather than recognizing them as complex individuals. But no one's entire being should be defined by their worst actions. Think about the quality in yourself that you're least proud of. Would you want people to make assumptions about who you are as a person based just on that behavior? I know this course is about dealing with difficult people, but what I really want you to think about is dealing with difficult behavior. By distinguishing the behavior from the person, you'll see the human underneath and create space for them to show up differently. This person who's frustrating you likely does have good qualities and intentions, even if they aren't obvious right now. When you give people the benefit of the doubt and assume best intentions, they tend to show up as better versions of themselves. Now, this doesn't mean excusing harmful actions, but maintaining empathy enables productive conversation. When we separate the person from the behavior, they become someone who's behaving in a problematic way, but who is capable of change. And with understanding and collaboration, transformation often can happen. In our next video, we'll explore the levels of difficult behavior that you might be encountering. When dealing with difficult coworkers, it helps to understand the different levels of difficult behavior. This will help you figure out next steps. There are 4 main levels. In level 1, the behavior is just different from yours. We all have our own styles and quirks. Maybe this person is more outspoken or competitive or just more unconventional than you are. If it isn't inherently problematic, ask yourself if your reaction might say more about you than it does about them. Can you expand your comfort zone? In level 2, the behavior is a result of the person lacking certain skills or abilities. For example, they might struggle with completing tasks on time, or they might need to improve their communication abilities. Often this stems from situational issues like being less experienced in their role or facing personal challenges outside work. These shortcomings usually have room for coaching and improvement. It may not be your place to coach them, but even recognizing what's going on can help you feel more empathetic toward them and also to take things less personally. In level 3, the behavior is sincerely frustrating. This covers many of the chronic difficult behaviors like negativity, micromanaging, or passive-aggressive behavior. Improvement in these behaviors will require their willingness for self-reflection and change. And we'll be going over many categories of level 3 behavior in future videos, so stick with me. In level 4, the behavior is simply unacceptable. Examples are bullying, harassment, or actively harmful conduct. These behaviors demand action given their egregious nature. With this behavior, it's imperative to set firm boundaries, enlist HR or management, or pursue removal from their role if they're unreceptive to change or if the behavior jeopardizes other people or the organization. Remember, most difficult behaviors fall within the normal range of human shortcomings in the workplace, and that's usually levels 1 through 3. So right now, I want you to think about a colleague you're having a tough time getting along with. Maybe it was the person who inspired you to watch this course, or the person whose name popped into your mind as we got underway. Now, I want you to think about their difficult behaviors. You can even write them down. Take a look at those behaviors and categorize them into level 1, 2, 3, or 4. Go ahead and do that now. Understanding the level can help you decide on the appropriate response, which is what we're going to be working on moving forward. It's so easy to point fingers, isn't it? But if there's one thing I've learned from working with people on their relationships, it's that we tend to wildly underestimate the role that we play in our frustrations with other people. When working with a difficult coworker, our instinct is often to blame them or to see them as the whole problem. But the truth is, every relationship dynamic between two people is co-created by both people. While it's much easier to see and critique frustrating behaviors in others than it is to acknowledge them in ourselves, the first step is always to turn the mirror inward and explore what you can discover, own, and change in yourself to improve things. So how do you do this? First, ask yourself, what can your frustrations with this other person teach you about yourself? One thing to consider is that we tend to judge people more harshly if their behavior reminds us of behavior that we exhibit but wish we didn't. For example, I have a friend who was complaining about the way his boss gives him feedback. He said that it was harsh and unkind. But the truth was, this friend of mine, he can be a little harsh and unkind as well. I asked him if he thought that maybe he could be that way sometimes. And he realized he can be quite short with people, and it's something he feels a little self-conscious about. So it was easier to judge it in his boss than to face it in himself. Sometimes the person you find frustrating is just exhibiting behavior that you feel a little envious of. For example, I once worked with a client who had this attention-seeking colleague, and they were absolutely infuriated by this person. But when we explored it, my client admitted that he wished that he got a little more airtime and attention. So you can see how he might be especially annoyed with someone who asks for it so easily. Once you've explored this, ask yourself, could any of your habits or conduct be contributing negatively to your dynamic with this other person? Even if the other person's actions seem really problematic, you likely have some ownership too. For example, are you dismissive of their ideas or input? Do you avoid collaborating? Did you decide a long time ago that you don't really like this person and you haven't given them a chance to improve things? I had a client who felt overburdened at work, but she would still say yes every time her colleagues requested her assistance. Over time, she came to see them as demanding and insensitive, not realizing that she had played a part in the problem by saying yes when she wanted to say no. The point with all of this is not to blame yourself. It's to recognize how your actions shape difficult workplace relationships. And this ownership can be empowering because you do have agency over yourself. And just by acknowledging your own part to this other person, you give them permission to take ownership over the part that they're playing. For now, ask yourself, could I be the difficult person too? I want you to think of the example you came up with in the last video of a behavior that you're frustrated with. Now, I want you to ask yourself 3 questions, and maybe even say the answers aloud. Hearing things out loud tends to help us be curious about how objective we're being. 1. Is this behavior something that I'm guilty of as well? 2. Does this behavior point to anything that I might feel some envy about? And 3, are there any ways I might be contributing to this behavior? By owning your part, you increase your chances for successfully shifting the dynamic. Let's dive into some of the specific types of problematic behaviors that are common at work. The first one we'll talk about is bad habits. Now, of course, we all have bad habits, but when people's bad habits spill into the workplace, they can cause problems and strain relationships. Common examples of bad habits are things like chronic lateness, procrastination, gossiping, or being disorganized. Remember our scale for understanding levels of difficult behavior from a few movies ago? I would classify bad habits as a level 2 behavior on that scale because many are changeable with self-awareness and effort. In many cases, the person wants to change but might not be sure how. Or they might be willing to change but not realize their behavior is a problem. So start by assessing the person's level of insight. Let's use the example of someone who keeps showing up late to your one-on-one meetings, and you're starting to feel resentful that your time isn't being respected. How should you confront this behavior? Remember to let them opt into the conversation, but once they do, you might say something like, I noticed you joined our last couple meetings a bit late. I know this is super common practice in a lot of organizations, but one thing that's kind of cool about our company culture is that we work hard to start and end meetings on time. I wanted to share because this was something I needed to adjust to when I got here. If they want to improve, offer help. You might share techniques that have worked for you or others. So, for example, you might say, I used to set alarms for myself for 5 minutes before it was time to go to a meeting so I'd remember. It's also important to be transparent about how the behavior affects you and the team, and try to frame it constructively. So, something like, we value everyone's opinion in these meetings, so we can't really dive into things until everyone arrives. You might also offer to check in with this person down the road to see how they're doing. You can say, I know I threw a lot at you here. Let's plan to check in about a month to see how things are going. Then don't forget to follow up with them and give them positive reinforcement if you see their bad habits improve. With patience and accountability, ingrained bad habits can evolve. Offer support, share constructive feedback, and provide resources. The goal is increasing their self-awareness and commitment to change. But what if in the course of your discussion with them, you learn there's something deeper going on, like a mental health struggle that's behind the bad habit? We're looking at how to handle that in the very next movie. I worked with a client whose manager was going through a really difficult family crisis. And as a result, this manager was unresponsive to my client's emails and messages. They were also unfocused on their work, and they even asked my client for all kinds of advice that my client was really not in a position to give. Let's talk about another level 2 behavior, which is behavior that results from mental health struggles. When coworkers or even managers grapple with mental health challenges like anxiety, depression, or grief, it can show up as concerning workplace behaviors. Things like missed deadlines, oversharing, not showing up for work, or seeming less approachable. With this category of behavior, it's important to come from a place of empathy. Offer compassion and support, but also set necessary boundaries. Remember that having genuine compassion for someone does not mean it's your responsibility to take on or fix their struggles. Instead, ask how you can realistically assist them. Are lighter deadlines or remote workdays an option? Can some of their tasks be covered temporarily? Are they informed about the resources available to them? Identify accommodations that make space for their health needs. Encourage this person to speak with a manager, HR, or a mental health professional. And you can also pass along information about your organization's wellness resources. It's so important to remember the limitations of your control in this kind of situation. You can listen with care, but handling mental health issues extends beyond your role. If the behavior persists too long, have an honest talk. You can say, I want to be supportive, but this is affecting the team's work. What else can we try to find a better balance? And consider involving leadership if no compromise is reached. With my client, we role-played how to politely but firmly request that their manager seek support, emphasizing the impact on others. We also practiced setting strong boundaries. The next time my client's manager started to vent, my client said, hey, I can tell that you're really going through something tough here, and I'd love to support you, but I don't think I'm the right person to help. Ultimately, the manager took a leave of absence and returned with renewed focus. One of the best things you can do to support someone else's mental health is to prioritize and care for your own. A lot of us believe when it comes to relationships that our attitude should be, I'll take care of you if you take care of me. But I think we should really be saying, I'll take care of me for you if you'll take care of you for me. By tending to your own mental and emotional health, you lessen the burden on others, and you invite those around you to care for themselves as well. All of us will be in this position at one point or another, where life has thrown something difficult at us and it distracts us from the work we need to do. If you're currently working with someone who's dealing with this, ask yourself which of the following actions you'll take to help. Will you simply extend empathy? Will you make accommodations? Or will you direct them to external support, which might mean talking to their boss or HR? Just remember, staying patient and flexible and human can make all the difference. I think procrastination sometimes gets a bad rap. Some people genuinely do their best work at the last minute. But what happens when they don't get their work done in time and it affects everyone around them? The next several behaviors we'll be discussing are level 3 behaviors that can be sincerely frustrating. And the first one we'll talk about is absent behaviors. Now, of course, it's natural for any of us to occasionally be absent-minded, distracted, or unfocused. But consistent absent behavior at work, like procrastinating on important tasks, missing meetings, not communicating effectively, or blowing deadlines, can be a huge drain on productivity and collaboration. To deal with absent behavior, start by checking in with yourself. Is there anything you might be doing to contribute to the dynamic? For example, have you been clear enough about deadlines? Are your expectations of this person reasonable? For example, I had a client who was upset that his colleagues weren't responding to his messages at night and on weekends. He felt that they were being absent and unfocused. I felt that they were having good boundaries. Once you've checked in with yourself, it's time to check in with your colleague. Ask if everything is okay and how you can support them. Listen without judgment and offer help where reasonable. Then clarify expectations. For example, revisit job requirements and essential duties that they may be missing. Highlight policies around attendance or performance, and help them understand how their behavior affects you and your work. So you might say, when you give me your part of the work late, I feel overwhelmed and flustered because then I don't have enough time to do my part. You may also need to discuss obstacles and root causes. Is their workload unrealistic? Are they lacking skills or motivation? Identify these issues to tackle together. Finally, create a concrete plan for improvement with action steps, deadlines, and milestones. Offer training if needed, and outline consequences if the plan isn't followed. Then you need to provide supportive accountability moving forward. So give frequent feedback on their progress, both positive and constructive. Consistent absent behavior often stems from underlying issues. Address these empathetically while upholding clear standards. With structure and support, improvement is very possible. Remember the Debbie Downer character on Saturday Night Live? The one who only focused on the negative side of everything? Womp womp. Negativity breeds more negativity. Dealing with pessimistic coworkers who play the victim, oppose ideas, complain without suggesting solutions, or shirk responsibility can be exhausting. I would put these behaviors in the level 3 category, behavior that's truly frustrating. I worked with someone years ago who responded to every idea with, no, that's not right. Sometimes he'd say, no, that's not right, and then suggest almost the exact same idea back to me. When faced with chronic naysaying or blame shifting, first things first, avoid getting sucked into the drama. Don't validate their counterproductive outlook. Instead, focus the conversation on your experience and needs. You could say, when you shoot down my suggestions without offering alternatives, I feel discouraged. I'd appreciate us brainstorming solutions together. Beyond that, I want to share some common ways negativity rears its head for people, as well as responses you can use to stay empowered. When dealing with excessive negativity, provide concrete examples of how their negative mindset might not be an accurate picture. So you might say, both times you've said this project would fail and it succeeded. I'd love if we could approach future challenges with more optimism. If you notice that someone's negativity might be their way of preparing themselves or protecting themselves, you can empathize with their worries without enabling victimhood. So you might say, I know you feel anxious about this presentation. Let's plan thoroughly to get you feeling confident. Here's another one. Let's say you have a colleague who's a chronic complainer. In this situation, try to channel negativity into problem solving. You can say, complaining isn't going to help us reach our goal. Let's shift our mindset to figuring out what steps we can take. And last, and perhaps most importantly, sometimes just the simple act of checking in can make a huge difference. For example, hey, I've noticed that lately you've had trouble being optimistic about things. Is everything all right? Can I support you in any way? Of course, there's a limit to how much empathy each of us has to spare. Don't be afraid to bring in the support of management or HR if the problem persists. Here's an interesting thing I also want you to reflect on. If you notice a lot of negativity around you, it can be helpful to check in with yourself about how much emphasis you put on the positive. Have you left room for other people to be the optimistic one? Here's what I mean. Sometimes when a person is being negative, it's because they feel they're the only one holding that position. They worry that if they act more positively, issues will fall through the cracks because no one else is paying attention to them. In this situation, I've found that it can be helpful to take some of the burden off of them by saying, I appreciate that you're looking out for us here. I'm going to make sure to pay attention to possible issues so that you don't have to be the only person worrying about it. Try this the next time you feel like someone is being overly negative. You just might make them feel heard enough to let go of some of those fears and anxieties. I worked with a client once who was the definition of a perfectionist. She managed her anxiety by trying to control every aspect of everything she did. And while she complained that her colleagues were slacking, they complained that she had ridiculous standards that no one could meet. If you've ever worked with someone like this, you know that collaborating with controlling perfectionists or competitive colleagues who disregard teamwork can be really challenging. This is another level 3 behavior. Some common traits of this behavior are needing to monitor and manage everything, even tasks that aren't theirs, setting unrealistically high expectations for themselves and others, refusing to collaborate or trust their teammates, or being stubborn and alpha in their approach. I've seen that this kind of behavior is really common at work because our occupational life can feel high stakes, and it can seem sometimes like there isn't enough success to go around. That success is like a pie, and every time someone gets a slice, there's less left for the rest of us. But in my experience, as we elevate others, we'll often be carried up with them. So to deal with this behavior, first reflect on your own role. Are you battling for control unnecessarily? If so, consider letting go in lower stakes areas. Constant tug of war will increase their controlling behaviors because if you try to fight for the upper hand, they'll want to control and win that too. Also, be honest with yourself. Are you showing up and doing your share of the work? Sometimes people act controlling because they feel they have to be that way for things to get done. When you do need to address it, start with appreciation. You might say, your motivation and eye for detail are so valuable. And at the same time, it can feel like you don't trust the team with their own work. How are you feeling about our collaboration? Then have an open discussion about responsibilities. Clarify which tasks need to be theirs versus shared goals requiring teamwork. And you might involve leadership if needed to increase accountability around collaboration. One thing I've also found is that adding more play into the mix can be really helpful with this kind of behavior. So think about starting your meetings with icebreaker questions and games. One of my very favorite games for this kind of situation is called Got It. I've put the instructions for that game in the exercise files. With patience and boundaries, controlling and competitive behavior can ease into healthy collaboration. Meet the person's need for control where possible and redirect it where necessary. Let's talk about a sneaky but very frustrating level 3 behavior. And that is when someone is being passive aggressive. Passive aggression is indirect hostility. So rather than openly communicating anger or frustration, people act it out. This can look like undermining. For example, maybe a coworker is upset that you got a promotion and they didn't, but rather than admitting that to themselves, they do things like question your authority on a project you lead in front of everyone. It can look like obstructing. So a teammate who feels competitive with you might agree to complete a task for you, but then they don't follow through. Or it can look like lateness. A colleague who feels annoyed that you want oversight on their project might arrive 15 minutes late to your weekly update meetings. An important thing to remember is that when someone is acting passive-aggressively, they might not even recognize their own frustration, because passive-aggressive behavior often happens when we are not ready to admit, even to ourselves, that we're upset. I want you to think about the last time someone acted out around you at work, meaning the last time someone's behavior seemed to be deliberately problematic. Maybe they said something rude during a meeting or went over your head instead of coming to you directly about a problem. To deal with something like this, the first thing to remind yourself is not to retaliate by acting passive-aggressively yourself. Instead, model owning your feelings and communicating directly. So you might say something like, "When you questioned my qualifications in front of the team, I felt undermined. In the future, it would feel a lot better if you would share your concerns with me privately." Next, think about what feeling might have lived underneath their behavior. Might they be envious, angry, embarrassed, overwhelmed? Once you have a sense of what might be going on, it can sometimes help to address the feeling that isn't being recognized by the other person. So you might say, I get the sense that you might be frustrated that I've given you administrative work to do instead of strategy work. Maybe that's why you missed this deadline. Does that feel true to you? Finally, listen and be open to hearing that you got it wrong. If this person isn't ready to face a tough feeling, then your interpretation might not ring true to them. But by communicating directly and with empathy, you'll have opened the door for a more direct conversation and collaboration in the future. Dealing with passive aggression takes patience and emotional intelligence. Though challenging, handling passive-aggressive behavior directly can lead to greater self-awareness, honesty, and understanding on both sides. Progress may feel slow at first, but continuing to respond with clarity and compassion rather than retaliation will open the door to improved relationships and more constructive conflict. Believe it or not, there is such a thing as healthy narcissism. The word narcissistic describes a wide range of traits, and a degree of self-focus and desire for validation is actually completely normal. But at the extreme, narcissistic behavior can look like an excessive need for attention and praise, a lack of empathy for other people's needs, high sensitivity to criticism, and an inability to acknowledge flaws or mistakes. And that's the kind we're talking about in this movie. By the way, narcissistic behavior is usually a level 3 behavior. A few years ago, I had a patient who was a successful financial analyst. He had a distinctly narcissistic air about him. Everything he did was perfect, and anyone who tried to tell him otherwise was just jealous or misguided. In our time together, he would often accuse me of wishing that I could be as successful as he was, and he spent a lot of time teaching me how to be a therapist. Now, of course, this frustrated me to no end, and it was clear to me that his inability to take criticism was negatively affecting all of his relationships. But what I came to discover through working with him was that as a child, his father was extremely critical and harsh, constantly telling him how useless and pathetic he was. To protect himself from feeling completely useless, my patient convinced himself that anything perceived as criticism was really just envy. Realizing this about him didn't instantly change him immediately, but it did increase my compassion for him. I took his reactions less personally, which in turn changed our dynamic. Of course, this is just an example. You're not always going to know why people are the way they are. But it can be really useful to remind yourself that we are who we are for reasons, and that sometimes a little compassion in the face of frustrating behavior can go a long way. But how do you deal with this behavior at work? Here's the most important, unintuitive thing. Even though it might be tempting to balance this person's over-the-top view of themselves by withholding positive feedback, it's actually quite important to praise them openly and publicly and offer any criticism privately and carefully. You heard me right. Don't let their desire for excessive attention and praise keep you from giving them the attention and praise that they do deserve. I know we don't like to reward bad behavior, but in being withholding, we tend to exacerbate the problem. Also, when giving feedback to a coworker with narcissistic behavior, try to frame it in a way that benefits them rather than just criticizing. So rather than focusing on their flawed behavior, show how change will benefit their goals. For example, you might say, I know you want the team to see you as an effective leader, and when you ignore questions during meetings, it keeps people from feeling like you have their back. But when you listen and respond, it helps them see that you're on their team. Now, I want to recognize that at its extreme, this behavior can be really frustrating, possibly even veering into level 4 behavior territory, and it can leave you feeling helpless. It's definitely one where you might need to involve leadership or HR. And if all else fails, it is sometimes necessary to assert boundaries and put distance between yourself and this other person. So that's a good place to start. Think about any narcissistic behavior that you've been experiencing. Does it reach level 4 status? If yes, involve HR. If not, use the steps we just covered to take control and make a change for the better. All right, let's discuss level 4 behavior. This movie is a bit different because I won't be giving you any tips for how to take ownership of your role or deal with these behaviors. And that's because these behaviors are simply unacceptable. Bullying, harassment, and any other forms of aggression have no place in a professional environment. This unacceptable behavior demands immediate action. If you experience or notice behavior like this, it's important to speak with management and HR to start a paper trail documenting incidents. Do not confront aggression alone. You have a right to feel safe. That said, you are well within your rights to set personal boundaries and protect yourself. Make it clear that certain conduct will not be tolerated. Then limit interactions when possible. Ultimately, aggressive individuals should be removed from the company if their behavior persists after interventions. Unfortunately, we all know that doesn't always happen when it should. Take time and care to protect your mental well-being, even if it means looking for a new role. Level 4 behavior should never be accepted. With collective action and enforcement of policies, a professional, respectful workplace can be restored. So, what's more challenging than a difficult person? A difficult person who can fire you. You might have heard the saying that people don't really leave jobs, they leave managers. A boss who behaves badly can negatively impact your entire well-being at work. But there are strategies you can use to confront and change the dynamic between you. Let's talk about a few of the difficult behaviors that I've seen from bosses and what to do if you're experiencing them. One classic frustration I hear about is people whose bosses don't show appreciation, give validation, or provide any recognition. Firstly, I want to share that there's nothing wrong with wanting appreciation or recognition. We all want to feel like the work we're doing is making a difference. But many bosses either forget to pause and give positive feedback, or they don't understand how important it is to keep people motivated. If you find yourself in this situation, don't be afraid to ask for feedback on your performance, including what you're doing well. And when they do give you positive feedback, say, "Thank you, I feel motivated knowing what I'm doing well, and regular updates like this help keep me engaged and let me know I'm on the right track." Another issue I see is bosses who don't give credit to their reports for the work they do. If your boss takes credit for your work, resist public confrontation or accusation, as this will only make them defensive. Instead, check in with yourself about why this recognition is important. Is it keeping you from getting the promotion you want, or is it more a matter of ego? And there's nothing wrong with wanting credit, but this is a good place to choose your battles. You can work to ensure your contributions are known, proactively share your ideas in meetings and presentations so colleagues are aware, and keep a record of your achievements and your contributions and feedback you've received in case you ever need concrete evidence. Now, if you're experiencing general unfairness with your boss, like favoritism or imbalanced workload, document clear examples over time, and then find a private moment to politely but firmly bring up the issue. You might say something like, "I know it's tricky to divide up projects evenly among the team, but looking back, I've noticed I consistently get handed the more tedious tasks. I want to do my share, but I also want a chance to work on more stimulating assignments. Can we figure out a way to balance things a bit more?" Remember, that last part is so key. Offer to co-create the solution with them. Next, if you find yourself left out of decisions that affect your work, don't be shy about speaking up. Wait for an appropriate opening and frame it constructively rather than confrontationally. For example, "I noticed the weekly meeting time was changed without me being consulted. I likely have some valuable insights based on my role that could help inform scheduling decisions like that. Would it be possible to include me in similar discussions going forward?" And finally, a very problematic behavior I've seen is bosses who lean on creating a sense of job insecurity as a management tactic. This is the work equivalent of threatening to break up with someone every time they disagree with you. If you find yourself in this situation, carefully but transparently explain that you're eager to perform at your best, but constant uncertainty makes that difficult. And if this behavior persists, it might be a sign that you should look into your options for working under someone else. But give them an opportunity to adjust their approach first. With any bad behavior that's not egregious, the goal is to give your boss a chance to adapt. You'll be surprised how often someone just isn't aware of their behavior or how it's affecting you. Most people do want to improve if they're approached from a place of collaboration and empathy. But if there's no progress, take care of your well-being and explore other options. One direct way to improve your relationship with your boss is to create a guide about how you do your best work. and I want you to start that right now. Take some time to think about your needs at work and write them down. You might write down things like, how do you prefer to receive feedback? Do you prefer it in writing so you can think about your response, or in person so you can have a conversation? You might share what time of day you do your best thinking, or you might write down that public praise goes a long way to motivate you. Once you have all this written down, turn it into a short document that you can give to your boss. And when you do, ask if they would be willing to share answers about themselves as well. Do you love being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and why you're doing it wrong? No? Yeah, me neither. When I was thinking about difficult boss behavior, I felt that micromanagement deserved a video of its own because it's a common frustration and it can be tough to know what to do about it. Micromanagement is a common struggle with bosses. Excessive oversight and aggressive control of the work that you're supposed to be doing can make you feel distrusted and patronized. But there are strategies you can use to mitigate this behavior. First off, start by assuming good intentions. Some people micromanage because they're genuinely trying to be helpful. Ask your boss if you can have a collaborative conversation. Let them know that you tend to do your best work when you're given space and trust, and ask if they would be open to testing out a system where they check in on you less. Offer to provide detailed plans up front to reassure them, and outline steps, timeframes, risks, and contingencies. Present the whole plan as something that will benefit them by taking up less of their time while still keeping them informed. You can also suggest moving toward autonomy a step at a time. For example, can they shift from requiring input on everything to being able to make suggestions at the onset? Or shift from constant check-ins to just regular reports on progress? Once you have an agreement, if they still interfere, reference the agreed-upon plan. It can also be helpful to evaluate if the micromanagement is really a problem or if it's something you can live with. If you're producing quality work, does their oversight really matter? Or do you just not like being told what to do? Or is their behavior getting in the way of you being productive? You may decide putting energy into pushing back is not really worthwhile. When you can, involve your boss in decisions and ask for their input and feedback, especially for anything you're unsure of. Sometimes when we feel micromanaged, we overcorrect and shut out our bosses completely. If there's one thing I know to be true about life, it's that problems are almost always easier to prevent than they are to fix. So let's talk about how to take a more proactive approach when it comes to difficult behavior. So much of people's difficult behavior is just a symptom or result of underlying interpersonal dynamic issues. By addressing those head on, or even better, by investing in your relationships before there are problems, you will save yourself a lot of time and frustration. Here are a few strategies to get ahead of things. Firstly, do your own self-work. The more self-aware, empathetic, and thoughtful you are about your own behaviors, the more you'll invite healthy behaviors toward you. When you notice yourself feeling critical of someone or their behavior, reflect inward first to make sure you're owning your contribution to the dynamic. Next, invest in building some trust and rapport with the people you work with. Get to know them personally and show genuine interest. Find common ground and shared goals. Having a foundation of trust goes a long way when it's time to confront problems with someone. One strategy I love is to set up a coffee date in the office with a different coworker each week. The gesture of asking for some casual one-on-one time goes a long way in and of itself, not to mention the connection that will form when you have time to get to know each other. Finally, give people the benefit of the doubt. Assume good intentions until proven otherwise. And wherever you can, catch people doing things right. Praise positive behaviors, even for, and really especially for, the people you find difficult. Give credit where it's due. To encourage this, I also recommend asking people directly what they need to do their best work. Different communication and feedback styles work for different people, so it's helpful to get a sense of what people need from you to be their best selves. And share the same information with them. I've added a list of questions you might think about asking the people you work with to the exercise files. If you do decide to confront someone about their behavior, here are a few tips to keep things from escalating unnecessarily. First off, let people opt into the feedback with you, meaning ask them if they're open to feedback and if it's the right time. If they're not, wait until they're in the right mindset to hear what you have to say. Next, critique the behavior, not the person. Saying, your behavior is frustrating feels different than saying, you are so frustrating. Avoid always and never language. It's almost never true that people always do anything. When you want to confront an issue that isn't necessarily anyone's fault, try this phrase. Can I complain without blame? For example, you might say, hey, can I complain without blame? We are way behind on our OKRs right now. How can we collaborate to get ahead of things? Write down these 4 tips somewhere, like on a Post-it, and stick it to your monitor. I promise you they will come in handy. With empathy, direct communication, and reinforcement of positive behaviors, many issues can be prevented proactively. All right, so you're ready to confront the difficult behavior you've been experiencing. To set yourself up for the best possible chance of success, remember these tips. Firstly, ask yourself, are you the right person to address the problem? Consider involving someone with closer ties, authority, or HR expertise. Second, make sure you're in the right mindset. If you're too emotionally activated, you risk an unproductive confrontation. Approaching difficult conversations from an attacking or critical stance rarely goes well. Think about it. When someone puts you on the defensive, are you in the right mindset to take in feedback? More often than not, it'll just make you dig your heels in deeper. Take time to calm down so you can have a solution-focused dialogue. Next, get their opt-in for the conversation. Offer some times to meet and make it clear that you want to discuss a healthier working relationship. Forcing the issue without their readiness is not going to go well. Once you do open up the conversation, take ownership of any part that you play so the talk is collaborative instead of attacking. Frame the conversation as seeking a mutual solution and use I statements. You can say something like, I want us to do our best possible work together. Could we brainstorm some ideas so we're both feeling positive about our collaboration? Finally, gauge if they're willing to change. Unfortunately, some people will get defensive or refuse to take responsibility. And if they won't meet you halfway, reflect on what boundaries you can set or what support you can recruit to protect yourself. With self-awareness and an open mind, difficult discussions can drive understanding and positive change. So what I'd like you to do is think of someone you'd like to have a difficult conversation with and go through these steps to see if it's the right time. If it is, get a conversation with them on the calendar for next week. Remember, disappointment and frustration that isn't expressed turns into resentment. And resentment is so much harder to fix than disappointment. So get that conversation on the calendar. I'm sure at some point in your life you have been told to go with the flow. But if you're anything like me, you'd probably be super excited to go with the flow as long as you know when the flow starts and where it's going and what time it'll get there. So to make the process of dealing with difficult behaviors more intuitive, I've created a flow chart to help you chart your path. I've put that in the exercise files. Go ahead and pull it up and let's go through it step by step. Once you have it up, I want you to think of a time you've thought to yourself, this person at work is just plain difficult. Keep this example in mind as you work your way through the chart with me. I'll use the example of a coworker who I felt was rude and difficult because he would often interrupt me during meetings. So the first step is to separate the person from the behavior. In my case, I would remind myself that although his behavior of interrupting felt rude to me, it is not necessarily the case that he is just a rude person without any redeeming qualities. Once you've done that, evaluate if the behavior truly matters or if you can let it go. We get irritated at small things sometimes. Consider if it's a battle worth choosing or if you can adopt a no big deal mindset. In my case, I tried ignoring the interrupting for a while, but it got to the point that I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. Next, analyze the type of difficult behavior. Is it just different from your personal style? Or is the person perhaps lacking in some capacity? Maybe they're struggling due to inexperience in the role or situational issues like personal problems. If so, they likely need support, not judgment. And is the behavior clearly disruptive or toxic? Things like harassment or verbal abuse require formal action. In my case, I realized that this coworker was mostly just enthusiastic and unaware of the impact of his actions. You'll notice the chart talks about building in shock absorbers. Shock absorbers are anything you can put into place that will help mitigate the issue. For example, shock absorbers in my situation might be saying something like, "Hold that thought, I want to hear it," when interrupted. Or a shock absorber might be asking for support from my manager. As you keep moving down the chart, you'll see that next you should check in about whether or not this person seems aware that their actions bother you. If they know their behavior is problematic but remain unwilling to change, then boundaries are your best friend here. A boundary might mean asking to be moved to a different project. It might mean bringing in a manager to help you deal with the situation. And it might even mean considering whether or not your current job is the best choice for you. From here, reflect on whether or not you're the right person to make change. And if so, if you're in the right emotional state to make change. If you feel too emotionally activated to react constructively, press pause, take some time to care for yourself first. For me, I waited until I was in a calm state to talk to my coworker. I also made sure to let him opt into the conversation. I told him that when he spoke over me during meetings, I felt frustrated and lost my train of thought. And it turns out he hadn't realized how often he was doing it. Once you're ready to confront the issue, clearly describe your experience and offer concrete solutions for improvement while leaving room for them to take steps in the right direction. My coworker and I agreed on a signal that I could give him if I wanted him to create more space for me in meetings. If the conversation doesn't go well, or if you don't see improvement, loop in others, like HR. Finally, don't forget to make sure people know when they've improved. Positive reinforcement is a really important part of creating healthier relationships. At the next meeting, when my coworker caught himself interrupting and asked me to finish my thought, I made sure to thank him afterwards and acknowledge the change. So, why did you take this course? I'm guessing there's a relationship you have at work that you're struggling with. Well, I'm proud of you for owning your piece in the dynamic. But what you have to do now is put what you've learned into action. So, your assignment for this week is to choose 3 specific examples of frustrating behavior that you've experienced at work. These can be current issues or past situations that have stuck with you. Go ahead and write those down and be as detailed as possible. For each example, carefully reflect on the role that you might play or have played in the challenging dynamic. How might your own actions, words, assumptions, or perspectives be contributing, even in minor ways? Jot down some honest notes of self-reflection. Next, categorize each difficult behavior based on the types we covered throughout the course. Remember our levels of difficult behavior with severity between 1 and 4? Write down the level and the root issue for each behavior. For example, are you dealing with a difference in work style? That's a level 1. Or are you dealing with something like bullying, which is a level 4? Then revisit the response flowchart we walked through. You can find it in the exercise files. Considering the level and the root issue you assign to each behavior, what constructive actions make the most sense for each situation? Draft an action plan for at least one of your 3 scenarios. Let's drill down on an example scenario together. Let's say a coworker often makes dismissive facial expressions when you speak in meetings. You categorize this under a level 2 situational struggle as they're newer to the team and you know they might not even realize they're doing it. So your action plan involves speaking privately to share your experience using I feel statements, asking if they have insight on the situation or if there's anything you might be doing in those meetings that they're reacting to, and offering to mentor them through examples of positive collaboration. Finally, plan out an empathetic, solutions-focused dialogue based on your action plan. You can draw on relevant scripts we created throughout the course for helpful templates, or role-play the conversation with someone you trust first. If you're feeling good about it, put that conversation on the calendar. Of course, not all behavior can be changed, but approach difficulties with good faith and patience first. And give people the benefit of the doubt. Progress often occurs one small step at a time through consistent positive effort. If you enjoyed this course, let's connect. You can find me at Dr. Emily Anhalt on all the socials or on my website, dremilyanhalt.com. Check out my gym for mental health, COA, at joincoa.com. And if you want to work on building even stronger work relationships, check out my other LinkedIn Learning course. Thank you for flexing your feels and breaking an emotional sweat with me today. I hope you now feel equipped to handle difficult behavior at work. Keep striving for self-awareness, empathy, and positive impact in how you relate to others and to yourself.